All right, hello everyone. We are back live for another Wednesday to hang out together. My name is Melissa. I am the community manager for the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation, and I have with me my amazing guests, Mindy and Marigold. Why don't we keep the pattern going of letting everybody know what you're reading to kind of we can get to know each other through what books we're enjoying for the week. So, Marigold, I'll let you kick us off with what have you been reading this week so far?
Well, as normal, I have multiples going. So I actually started the Agatha Christie, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And I also started a funny story by, I forget her first name,
Emily Henry.
Emily Henry, yes.
Yeah.
So those I have going on.
You have been taking to heart the recommendations that Mindy and I have been giving you, because I know Mindy loves her Agatha Christie books.
You too.
She's excited about that.
This one I got at the library book sale last weekend, so I was really excited. And when I saw Mindy said bought one too, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be reading this one first.
That book, I'm so envious. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm so envious that you get to read it for the first time, because that book is amazing. I mean, it doesn't get nearly the hype that And Then There Were None or Murder on the Orient Express gets, but it's just as good. So I know you're going to love it. I can't wait for you to finish it so we can talk about it.
I'm enjoying it so far. It's very interesting. I love her writing. So she's one of the amazing writers.
I've been thinking a lot about that this week, of the fun of reading with other people. And I know we all send each other like messages of what we got from the library and what we had reading, and just that little added oomph of like, oh, I can't wait to talk about it with you when you finish reading. It like really makes the excitement of whatever you're enjoying that much more heightened, that you know that there's going to be somebody on the other side to talk about it with. If you loved it, what were your thoughts while you're reading? And you guys, I was a little late to get to first impressions for this past month. And you guys really spurred me on with like, oh, I can't wait to talk about it because you're going to love it. And I think that really the beginning was like takes a little time to get into it, because you are like switching back and forth through perspectives and stories. But you guys telling me like, oh, there's something good coming really helped me push through. So some of those books, which we're going to talk about maybe later tonight, that you give up on and you don't finish reading, if you have somebody that you're reading it with, can sometimes like help you pull through that little rough patches in it. Mindy, what are you reading this week? I want to know.
Well, I was able to finish quite a few books last week, so I felt really good about that. And like Marigold, I decided to dive into a whole bunch of new books. So I have the London Seance Society from Sarah Penner. If you're not familiar with her, or maybe you are, she wrote The Lost Apothecary, which I really loved.
Yeah,
it was really big, and this is her newest book, so I'm into that right now. I'm also doing the next JLF book club pick, which is Jane Austen's Lost Letters. I feel like I have to really enunciate that one because it's got that little alliteration piece. Thank you. Yes, Jane Austen's Lost Letters. I'm reading that ebook style right now. I'm only about, I think, 8 or 9 chapters into it, and it's not at all what I anticipated. So I am anxious for everybody else to get into it, so we may read that together. And then with my son, I think I mentioned this last week, we just started The Last of the Mohicans. And that's a little bit challenging, but I actually gave him the option. If he wanted to stop, we could, and he wants to power through. So
love it.
Powering through we are.
Go mom, you're getting he's powering through his books, which is amazing. Now I'm really excited to get started on this one. I think I told you I'm going to plan to start it over the weekend, but I did have somebody sent me a message. They requested it from the library, and they loved the cover so much, which we were talking about last week, that they requested a couple books in the series because they were going out of town and thought that they would really like it. So it is book 14 in the series by Jane Cleland. So there are quite a few other books to grab. They're not Jane Austen based, like Stephanie Barron, like some of the other authors that you can get specific Jane related kind of cozy mysteries. And this is not. It has an antique spin on it, but this one just happened to have the Jane Austen theme with the lost letters. So we're gonna catch up with you, Mindy, and then we will all discuss what's going on with it. And before I forget, I should mention also this Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, we will be meeting for the book club for First Impressions. If you can't make it, we'll have the recording up so you can catch that as well. And maybe we'll open up a chat so anybody that can't make it, we can also discuss it a little bit in the chat as well. I have been reading a retelling of The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is paranormal take on it. It's really interesting. It's Rebecca, I want to say Kinsey, I think is the author. And before this one, she had a vampire retelling of, oh my goodness, my mind just went completely blank. Classic, The Great Gatsby. It was a vampire retelling of The Great Gatsby. So she really does some wacky, crazy spin on the classics, which I really enjoy, the little bit of paranormal aspect. I think she has Legend of Sleepy Hollow kind of retelling. Like, she's got some interesting ones out there, which I think, as we were talking about before, can be like a fun introduction to it, because now I've been reading it. I've never actually read Picture of Dorian Gray, so now I kind of want to go and like read that for the first time. But this like introduction is getting me excited about it. And Mindy's jaw dropped.
Oscar Wilde. It's so surprising when people haven't read, books that I consider classics. And so for you, I just can't imagine that you haven't read Dorian Gray.
I think the classics, Marigold backed me up on this one, so I'm not alone. But I think the classics can be really intimidating. And there's a lot that I'm familiar with the story of what they are, and I've explored them, in different forms. But it's hard to sit down and actually like read through the classics and have the patience and understanding. And I was talking with somebody online about it today because she had a really fascinating post about she doesn't read the classics and that they're really intimidating. And she was talking even about Jane Austen. And I was like, okay, whoa. Like, I have to intervene here because Jane Austen is worth reading. But I said, I think one of the things that can be intimidating about the classics is to truly appreciate them. You do need a frame of reference of the historical time period to really understand the classics themselves. Not that it's required to be able to read it and understand it, but it does enhance your reading experience. So you tend to kind of gravitate to your places that you're comfortable of classics in a certain time period, or you're like you are, Mindy, and you just appreciate the classics and love them, and the English teacher in you comes out. And you're going to definitely, though, get us to read so many more, I know, as we're chatting away, and you're encouraging us all to grab them.
Well, it's funny that you said that about teaching, because I used to teach Dorian Gray, The Picture of Dorian Gray, but I taught it alongside Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And so we talked about how people transform, and then, we have the idea of creatures and all that good stuff. So
yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have a whole discussion about that one very soon.
Okay.
And before I forget, I'm going to be starting listening to Northanger Abbey, and I wanted to let everybody know, because Marigold, you and I talk about audiobooks quite a bit. Libro FM, I don't know if either one of you are familiar with them. They're a wonderful company. They're employee run, I believe. They got a lot of great ethos behind their company, so go check them out. But they are doing a love audiobooks kind of heading into Valentine's Day. So through, I believe it's February 5th. It started today. It's today the 5th. Yes. Through the 14th, if you record 10 hours of audiobook listening, they have a little form you can fill out, and you can have one free credit for an audiobook from their website. And it is an honor system sort of thing. You just fill out the little form there. You don't have to be a member of Libro FM. As far as I understand, I read through all the fine print. But I think it's a great way to pick a classic is what I plan on doing. So I'm going to listen to Northanger Abbey. It's been on my bookshelf for a little while and enjoy that. So I will try to put the link to that in the comments after we're done so everybody can check it out. It's about an hour a day-ish. If you get through it, then you can check that out as well. I thought that was a really fun and interactive way to listen to Austen or the classics and enjoy a free audiobook. All right, shall we get into our discussion of the evening that Mindy so kindly put our graphics together for us? And tonight we have our favorite couples from the works of Jane Austen. We're going to be discussing favorites and least favorites. So this should be a lot of fun to see who we have.
I would love to hear from audience members tonight. So if anybody out there is joining us, either live or in the replay, please let us know if we got your favorite couple or if we missed a couple that's just fabulous. We'd love to know that.
Absolutely. And we just love to know where you're joining us from, too, as well as fun to see where across the globe people are watching either now or later, too. All right, so we have Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth. What is not to love about these two? Who had them picked as their couple?
I know it's a shock, but they're mine.
If we've gotten to know you at all at this point, we know it's Marigold. So what is it that you love so much about these two?
I love the second chance story. I love the I believe they make a successful marriage because it's one of mutual respect and sharing maturity, and developed over time. Like I just feel like they're more mature. I think this book, Persuasion, is like they're the most mature couple, and not just because they're older in life,
Yeah.
but their story and how their love lasted those 8 years that they were apart. It just, I don't know, it shows as a test of time, and that's why I think they're my favorite couple, because it just is such a strong, long-lasting love.
They're so precious together. Hello, Rosa. Thank you for joining us. Let us know your favorite Austen couple. We would love to know who you pick. So I'm curious, Marigold, has it always been these two for you as your favorite? Did you kind of develop feelings for them over time and settled in on them?
Well, it's funny because I read it in college, and I read Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice was always my favorite. And then later in life, as you get older, you reread things and you find yourself more connected with a certain character. And I feel like Anne and I are a lot alike. And I just feel that personal connection makes this book more to my heart. So I feel like over time it was the Pride and Prejudice, the Mr. Darcy, and all the wit and everything, which I love still, but I've changed as I've gotten older, and I feel more connected to her.
Yeah. And you just did this for a book club, right? That you're in?
I did. Yes. Which is a great book, which is all the classics, which I think is funny because we were talking about the classics. That's why I started started going to the book club, because I was like, I read all these in college. How much of these do I really remember? And I've enjoyed reading a lot of things that I haven't read and some that I'm rereading. So Pride and Prejudice I read again, and I'm like, yes, it's still my favorite now.
I love it. And it probably helps you pick, you're not choosing all of them. I'm guessing the book club as a whole chooses them. So it's pushing you to some that you might not gravitate towards as much, which is a really great aspect of why to be in a book club.
Yes, and we got to all put in names. So that Persuasion was my suggestion. Another one coming up is going to be in a few months is Hamlet, which is not my favorite. I love Shakespeare. I admire him, but I am not a fan of his writing because it's very difficult. So it's going to be interesting to see how I like it now compared to reading it in college, which is why I started the club, because I love rereading and seeing how I've changed in the characters too. So It'll be interesting to reread it.
Minnie's going to be cheering you on.
I will be. I think you'll love it. Hamlet gives me the giggles. And I know it's a very gloomy book, but I just love the poetry of everything. And, I'm excited for you. Maybe I'll just reread it for fun.
Well, I'll let you know which month we're reading it, so we can reread it again.
Sounds good.
I enjoy Shakespeare too. I had a cat named Shakespeare actually when I was a teenager because I was that nerdy about it. Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, this was my pick. It's just, I don't know, talking about classics, they're just the classic couple. It's so hard, as much as I love so many other of Austen's couples. They're kind of perfection together. And I was reading through some passages before we hopped on, and I had one that I wanted to read to you guys that kind of jumped out at me. And this is like after, okay, so we have Darcy and Elizabeth, to give you some context. They're kind of talking to each other about, this is the point where she asks him, like, why did you fall in love with me? Or when did you fall in love with me? And he was like, I was in the middle before I knew. But when this sentence jumped out at me, and she's basically saying, like, why didn't you give me any encouragement at Netherfield? And he said, and then he says, because you were grave and silent and gave me no encouragement. But I was embarrassed, and so was I. You might have talked to me more when you came to dinner. A man who had felt less might. And it kind of like, it's such a small sentence, but it made me think exactly of Emma, and his, like, loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more kind of thing. And a man who had felt less might. It just really jumped out at me that Austen likes her men to, like, they're almost so overcome they can't express their love to someone at the moment. And I think there's like those little tidbits of connections that she has between her characters that really stand out to me. But I don't know what else to say about Elizabeth and Darcy, but I feel like they're going to stand the test of time. They're just fit together so well because of the journey that she gives us of them both, their growth towards each other. That I think makes them so appealing as a couple. Anything else to add into them?
I adore them. And I was just working on some blog posts for the Jane Austen Summer Program, and I get the pleasure of covering Pride and Prejudice. So I was writing a little bit about them sort of later in the story. So we're talking like chapter 55, very close to the end. And that's the point where Elizabeth thinks she's lost Darcy. And you don't get this when you watch the movies, maybe because there's not time or it got edited out or whatever. But when you're reading it, she really has these soul-searching moments where she thinks, I could have loved him if I had been given the opportunity, if things had been different altogether, I could have loved this person. And she thinks it more than once. And I think that's the brilliance of this, Austen's writing, is that Elizabeth, she does come to that realization. She does have that moment when she understands that she misjudged him. And I really think that bodes well for them in the future because they did grow together and they overcame their prejudices.
Absolutely. And it is, you kind of don't think of them being lost to each other as much in Pride and Prejudice because they, it's not as long of a separation as we see in Persuasion, but they still do have that definite point where, maybe I'm not going to see him again. Maybe he's never coming back sort of moment. The absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say. All right, we know whose slide this is if you a while. Mindy, go ahead.
I'm such a fan of the Bingley family, and every chance I get to say how much I love Charles Bingley, I do take it. So while I adore Darcy and Elizabeth, I feel like Charles and Jane would end up having one of those enviable marriages where they just, from the moment they met one another, he looked at her and said, she's an angel, man. Like, how many of us can say that? I mean, really. So I just think that she had such a regard for him, and he cherished her from the moment he met her. And yes, they were, separated, but in the grand scheme of things, they were separated for like 6 months. I mean, they were separated for less than a year, and they still came back to one another quite easily. And so I just think, as far as having a happy marriage, I think there would be lots of smiles and jubilation and just all kinds of joy. So that's why I picked them as my favorite, because I would want to live with them and just be happy.
Not to get too far off track, but I'm curious to know your thoughts. Do you think Bingley would have found his way back to Jane on his own, and how long would it have taken him without Darcy confessing? He kind of helped the situation there.
Yes, I do think he would have found his way back to Jane, but I actually think it would have something to do with Netherfield Park, because at some point he would have had to have let go of the lease. And, I think that might have brought him back to the area, whether it was to, whatever goes along with that kind of estate ownership, right?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking he would eventually come back to town, and for him, just being back in that vicinity would have led him to Jane. But the reason I say that is because of the way he reacts when he runs into Elizabeth at the inn in Lambton, and then again at Pemberley. And it's he's delighted to see Elizabeth. And so I think that shows how much he cared for Jane.
I love it. They are a cute couple, we have to say. All right, so let's jump into our least favorite couples, which, I mean, we still love them. It's not that we don't love them, but the ones that we would not want to be maybe living in the same household with them for any length of time. So first up, we have Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, who had the two of them.
This was mine. And as I did my most recent deep dive back through Pride and Prejudice, I was really trying to pay attention to the way the girls, the Bennet sisters, spoke about their parents. And there is a passage a little bit over halfway through the book where Jane Austen does say that Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have been married for 23 years. Which I guess makes sense when you consider how old Jane and Elizabeth are supposed to be. But they've been married for 23 years, and it's like they go on to say Mrs. Bennet was so beautiful in her youth, and that attracted Mr. Bennet, but it did not last long at all. And I think in a lot of ways, they didn't necessarily make each other miserable, but they certainly, I think, made life a little bit more difficult for each other and for their girls, because of the examples they set.
They have a very antagonistic relationship where neither one is trying to comfort or soothe the other or help, or we don't really see any partnership in their relationship at all, do we?
No.
When I was reading I'm going to say it wrong. Is the other Bennet sister, the one about Mary Bennet? The author there really touches on how strained things were in the Bennet household, because Mr. Bennet spent most of his time in his library, did not want to be around not only his wife but his girls as well. And that's obviously her take on it, taking it a little bit further than Pride and Prejudice does. But I think it's such a valid point that when you are living with two people who barely tolerate each other, it can make the rest of the household quite miserable.
Absolutely. And I wonder if she was not from her own parents, but like if she had maybe stayed at a house where she noticed a dynamic like that and thought it would play really well into it, because it does affect so many aspects of moods and tensions that are underlying throughout everything, every decision that's being made, everything that's going on in the house kind of revolves around that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I had Mr. and Mrs. Elton because, oh my goodness, I don't care if you're reading them. I don't care what movie adaptation. They're just cringy. They're so cringy. I do think they're maybe perfect for each other. But I pulled out the passage where Emma is just basically losing her mind because Mrs. Elton is like, you're not going to believe who I saw. It was Knightley, and Emma's like, I'm gonna lose it with this woman, and I just love that passage. And I love how it's like it leads in with like something about Emma thinks is gonna be someone that Mrs. Elton has had a long-standing acquaintance with, the way she's referring to them, and then she has the audacity to say Knightley, Mr. E, just her. It's so, I think it's one of those little things we don't appreciate as much as somebody that was contemporary reading this, realizing the audacity of her being so informal with these men's names. Um, I delight to hate them as characters, and just the way that they interact with everybody, and they even kind of try Mr. Knightley's patience at times as well, which seems pretty hard to do because he's like the even keeled one in all situations. But how do you guys feel about the two of them?
Marigold, do you have an opinion?
I think they're the couple that you love to not like. Because even the adaptations on video, or like the movies, the same thing. You just get that, you just can't help yourself. You're like, oh, they're so good at playing these roles because they're just so annoyed by them. So I think they're the couple that you like to dislike.
Yes.
For me, when I finished reading Emma this past weekend, I was paying special attention because I knew you'd mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Elton. And also Melissa had mentioned Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. So
Yes.
I was my interest was piqued, and I was watching them as couples. And especially with Mr. and Mrs. Elton, even on the very last page, where Austen kind of wraps things up quickly at the end of Emma, one of the last thoughts comes from Mrs. Elton, and she's a little bit distressed because Mr. Knightley is marrying Emma, and she says, well, there goes our relationship with him. We'll just never get to see him again, and she will keep him all to herself. And, she's going on and on and on. And I just wanted to mention that I think it was maybe a little bit of fun on Austen's part to give Mrs. Elton the last word there.
Absolutely. Yeah, Frank and Jane definitely had rival up there, but I think because we don't know their couple for as long as we do, I had to give it to these two to win out on that. All right, and then Minnie, we have yours.
I think this is Marigold's.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you started with yours. Sorry.
It's funny. I was playing with the idea of Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill as well, but because we don't see them as a couple, I was like, oh, well, you don't really get to see that. They're not really the couple you get to experience. So I choose Lydia and Wickham because, oh boy, I the thing about them is that like she just is so flirty and flighty. With first she likes, was it her first Captain Carter, and then she's interested in Officer Denny, and so she's just like all over the place. So as a couple, they are not in love. You can, there's no like love match there. And the thing that bothers me is that throughout the story, they don't really change. So their situation changes, but they don't grow as like characters or as a couple. I mean, this is how I feel, but they don't grow into a couple. They don't grow into anything. They're just kind of stagnant characters that just don't evolve. So those things just drive me nuts in stories.
And they are an interesting couple to let your mind wander and think where were they even a decade later in their life? What happened to them? Did they keep coming to? I think is it in Death Comes to Pemberley, where we kind of see they kept coming for help, and they're still hanging around with everybody, and they can't seem to get rid of them, and they're flying in and out and all that. Yeah, it would be really interesting to sit down with Jane Austen and hear where she might have envisioned them to be later in the relationship.
Absolutely. Plus, Lydia, I just want to shake her. The whole time they mentioned it, I'm just like, what are you doing?
Well, it's funny that you both mentioned where they end up, because my next Jane Austen inspired Regency book is going to be called The Framing of George Wickham. So I have got plans for the Wickhams.
Love it. I think we also don't think enough about the fact that Mr. Darcy went from like cannot stand him to his brother-in-law by the end of this. Like, we don't really think about the connection of like that was definitely, I think, even more than overcoming Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet, like the fact that he knew ahead of time. It wasn't like a surprise after the fact that these two were going to stay in his life. Like, he's the one that made it, kind of happen. And he still willingly married Elizabeth, knowing that Wickham was not going to be out of his sight for forever, kind of situation. So interesting family dynamic for their dinners, I am sure, at the Bennett household. All right, and next we have our topic, and we're right at 30 minutes, so we'll just kind of wrap this up. It's a quick topic, but we'll do to DNF or not to DNF. And for anyone that's wondering what is DNF, that means did not finish for a book. So you just got to a point, you're like, I cannot do it anymore, and you put it down. Maybe you revisit it later. Maybe it's like absolutely not for you and you're never going to pick up that book again. So we can share our quick thoughts of what is your policy and how do you approach books. So Marigold, do you ever stop a book once you've started? What's kind of your mindset about it?
I don't usually DNF. I'm kind of like a mood reader though. So like if I start a book and I'm not into it, I'll put it aside, back on the shelf, and just come back to it when I feel like it. And see if I feel like it in like a month, or maybe it'll be next year. Like it just rotates in whatever books are. However, I did have one from my book club that was Faulkner's Absalom, which I did not finish. It may be the only book that I have not finished because I was like halfway and forget it. And I wasn't alone because a lot of our book club actually felt the same. And so I got to the book club like, I'm going to be the only one that didn't finish. This is the first time I've ever had this issue. But they're like, did you finish? I'm like, no. Oh, we didn't either. Oh, thank goodness.
Wow. And Mindy, how about for you? What's your DNF policy?
I always finish, but I am a rad bad skimmer. So when I was in a book club, it was one of those where they would pick a different genre every month. And sometimes I would get things that just were way out of my wheelhouse. And so I would, read it through as quickly as I possibly could, doing the skim. And now that I do so many audiobooks, I just put that on 2 times and let it roll. And, done in a few hours. It's so simple. So I was telling you both before the stream started, though, I did offer my son, if he wanted to do not finish our current book, I would allow that. But he's into it, so I'm into it, and we're going to power through.
Oh my goodness, I love it. And I am liberal with my DNFing. I can tell pretty quickly if it's not a book for me, and I am just, I used to feel like I needed to get through it, but now I have so many books to get through, so many stacks of things, that if it's not driving with me, I'm going to put it down or return it to the library or whatever and pick up something else. And I typically don't go back to a book unless I can tell it's like just the subject matter. Maybe it's like a little heavy or something, and I'm, like you said, Marigold, mood reading, like I'm just not in the right mood for it, then I will revisit it. But if it's just something about it is irritating me or whatnot, nope, it's gonna go back, and it's not, or I'll donate it, the little free library, whatever needs to happen, and I will never think about it again. Someone else can enjoy it. So,
I think why I read multiple books is because if I'm not feeling it at that moment, I'll go to another one. And I think the multiple books just keep it going.
Oh my goodness. My brain can't handle multiple stories. I'm like all in on one at a time. Mindy, what do you do with your reading? Multiples or one at a time?
Oh yeah, multiples. But I do it because of the different formats. Like when I was at the dentist office today, it's easiest to pull up the ebook. When I am walking, it's easiest to do the audiobook. So it just depends. That's why I always have different ones going, because I need the different options for how I'm leading the day.
No, yeah, audiobook and reading a book is that I could handle too going, but typically my audiobooks tend to be nonfiction. So it feels like very separate subject matters. Yeah, I love that we represent so many different ways of reading styles, what we're reading, what we're listening to, everything that goes into it. So thank you guys for such a fun chat about Austen's couples. It was a lot of fun. Again, if anybody is watching this later, feel free to drop in the comments what you're reading, your thoughts on DNFing, your favorite Austen couples. We love to hear all of it. And I will also try to share the link for Libro FM so you can check out that audiobook challenge and take part in that if you would like to. So until next week, the time goes by so quickly. We will see you all later. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.